If you held the power to write history, would you honor the truth or protect your life by serving a king's lies? In the kingdom of Kush, where pyramids pierce the sky like stone prayers and the Nile carries the whispers of 1,000 generations, this question would soon tear at the heart of one young woman whose ink would determine not just her fate, but the fate of truth itself. Meet Nephra, daughter of scribes, keeper of words, guardian of memory. At 19, she possessed hands that could make hieroglyphs dance like poetry and a mind sharp enough to translate the whispers of ancient gods into the language of mortals. Every word we write, she often whispered to herself while working by lamplight, travels through time to touch minds we'll never meet. How dare we make those words lies? But on this day, as the desert wind carried troubling news toward the palace walls, Nephra had no idea that her deepest beliefs were about to face their greatest test. The royal palace of Meroe was more than a home for kings. It was a temple to memory itself. Every wall told stories, every column sang of victories, every chamber held the accumulated wisdom of centuries. In the Hall of Records, where Nephra spent her days, the very stones seemed to pulse with the heartbeats of history. Here stood accounts of Queen Ammonirina's, who fought Roman legions to a standstill. Here lay the chronicles of trade expeditions that brought gold from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean world. Each symbol I paint, Nephra had told her younger apprentices just days before, is sacred. We are not mere scribes. We are the voices of the future, speaking to generations yet unborn. They will judge their ancestors by what we choose to record today. But in his private chambers, King Amanakarakaram paced like a caged lion. 3 days prior, his army had returned from the southern provinces, not in victory procession, but in shameful retreat. The Nubian rebels had outfought, outmaneuvered, and humiliated the royal forces. Your Majesty, his general had reported, had bowed in shame. We underestimated their knowledge of the terrain. Their archers picked off our chariots before we could engage. We lost 300 men and gained nothing but sand and sorrow. The king's fury had shaken the palace walls. A pharaoh's legacy lived or died by military glory. How could he face his people, his nobles, his gods, with the stain of defeat marking his reign? That's when his eyes had fallen on the Hall of Records, and a terrible idea began to form. The summons came at dawn, carried by a messenger whose nervous eyes wouldn't meet Nephra's gaze. "The king commands your immediate presence in the throne room," he announced, his voice barely steady. "Bring your finest writing materials." Nephra's heart quickened. Royal commissions were the highest honor for a scribe. Perhaps the king wanted her to record some great proclamation or treaty. She gathered her finest reed pens, her blackest ink, her smoothest papyrus. The throne room fell silent as she entered. King Amanakarakaram sat upon the golden lion throne, but instead of the usual royal confidence, his posture spoke of barely contained rage. "Nephra, daughter of scribes," his voice echoed through the vast chamber. "You are here because your reputation for eloquence precedes you. I have a task that requires your particular skills." "I am honored to serve your Majesty," Nephra replied, though something in the king's tone made her stomach tighten with unease. 3 days ago, the king began, his voice gaining strength, "our glorious army achieved a magnificent victory against the rebel tribes of the south. Our warriors showed courage that would make the gods themselves weep with pride. Our chariots thundered across the battlefield like the hooves of celestial horses. The rebels fled like jackals before lions, and their leaders begged for mercy at my feet." Nephra's pen stopped moving. Her heart began to pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had been in the palace courtyard when the army returned. She had seen the wounded soldiers, heard their whispered accounts of retreat and defeat. She had watched the king rage in his private chambers at the humiliation. "This is the truth you will record for all eternity," the king continued, his eyes boring into hers. "Future generations will read of this triumph and know that Amanakarakaram was a king who brought glory to Kush. Do you understand your task, scribe?" The throne room seemed to spin around Nephra. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Ink is eternal, daughter. Write wisely, for your words will outlive the pyramids themselves. Your Majesty, she began carefully, I want to ensure I capture every detail accurately. Perhaps I could speak with some of the soldiers the soldiers will tell you what I have told you. The king's voice cut through her words like a blade. There is only one truth in this kingdom, scribe, and it is the truth your king proclaims. Will you serve that truth, or will you serve something else? The threat hung in the air like incense smoke, heavy and inescapable. That night, Nephra sat in her chambers staring at blank papyrus until her eyes burned. The lamplight flickered across words that refused to come, across ink that seemed to rebel against lies. Father, she whispered to the empty room, remembering his teachings. You told me that scribes are the memory of the people. But what happens when the people's memory conflicts with a king's command? She could almost hear his voice. Nephra, my daughter, truth may be buried under sand, but the Nile will always uncover it. A scribe who serves lies serves no one. Not king, not people, not gods. Sleep brought no peace, only visions that made her toss and turn like a boat in a storm. She dreamed of scrolls bursting into flames, of her father weeping tears of ink, of future children reading lies and building their lives upon foundations of deception. In her dreams, the great scribes of the past surrounded her sleeping form. The man who recorded the victories of Queen Candace, the woman who chronicled the building of the Great Pyramid at Nuri, the ancient keeper of laws who ensured justice for generations, all looked upon her with eyes that asked a simple question. Will you join us in honor, or will you stain our legacy with royal lies? She woke at dawn with tears on her cheeks, but steel in her spine. Her decision was made, though it might cost her everything. If I must die for truth, she whispered as she dipped her reed pen in ink, then let me die with clean hands and a pure heart. But I will not let lies poison the well of history. 2 days later, the throne room filled with the cream of Kushite society. Nobles draped in fine linens, advisors wearing their golden chains of office, merchants hoping to curry favor, generals still bearing the shame of recent defeat, all had come to hear the official record of what the king proclaimed as triumph. Nephra entered carrying her scroll like a sacred relic. Her face was calm, but those who looked closely could see the trembling in her hands, the slight quiver of her lips that spoke of enormous internal struggle. King Amanakarakaram sat forward eagerly on his throne. Approach, scribe, and let the court hear how history will remember the glorious victory of their king. Nephra unrolled the papyrus with ceremonial dignity. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she stood silent, her eyes moving across the hieroglyphs she had painted with such care and anguish. Your Majesty, nobles and honored guests, her voice rang clear and strong through the vast chamber. I present the true record of the southern expedition. She began to read, and at first, the words seemed to match the king's desires. Tales of brave soldiers marching south, of royal banners gleaming in the desert sun, of the king's wise strategies and noble intentions. But then, her voice changed. The cadence shifted. The story turned. But when the armies met in battle, her voice rose with passion. Truth demands that I record what truly transpired. Our soldiers, brave though they were, found themselves outmatched by warriors who knew every rock and ravine of their homeland. Gasps echoed through the throne room. Advisors looked at each other with growing alarm. The king's face began to darken like storm clouds gathering over the Nile. The rebel archers, positioned with cunning in the high places, sent arrows that found their marks with deadly precision. Our chariots, pride of our forces, became traps in terrain they could not navigate. 300 brave souls gave their lives not in victory, but in a retreat made necessary by circumstances beyond their courage. Silence. The king's roar shook the very columns of the throne room. How dare you speak treason in my presence? But Nephra did not cower. Instead, she stood taller, her voice growing even stronger. Your Majesty, I speak not treason, but truth. And truth honors both the courage of our fallen soldiers and the wisdom needed to learn from this encounter. History carved in lies serves no one, not king, not kingdom, not the gods who watch over Kush. The throne room erupted into chaos. Some nobles shouted for Nephra's immediate execution. Others, perhaps remembering their own sons who had died in the ill-fated expedition, nodded slowly at her words. General Khaliset, who had led the southern expedition and bore the shame of its failure, stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of experience and loss. "Your Majesty," he said, removing his helmet in a gesture of humble respect, "the young scribe speaks truly. I would gladly have died before returning with news of defeat, but death in service to lies would have dishonored both my soldiers and my king." Other voices began to join his. A mother whose son had died in the retreat. A traitor who had witnessed the army's return. A priest who spoke of the gods' hatred for falsehood carved in stone. King Amanakaragram found himself facing something no pharaoh expects, a kingdom that values truth over comfortable lies. His fury began to mix with something more complex, the gradual recognition that his people's loyalty came not from his perfection, but from his honor. Then, from the side of the throne room, an elderly voice spoke with the authority of decades. "My son." Queen Mother Amon-Irenas rose from her seat. Though aged, she carried herself with the dignity of one who had ruled in her own right, who had faced Roman legions and emerged unbroken. "A lie carved in stone may last a century," she said, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom earned through years of leadership, "but truth in people's hearts lasts forever. Which legacy do you choose to leave your son?" The king's rage flickered like a flame in wind. For a moment, the throne room held its breath, waiting to see whether pride or wisdom would triumph in the heart of their pharaoh. Nephra stood in the center of it all, her scroll held not as a weapon, but as an offering, the gift of truth to a kingdom that desperately needed to hear it, even if it hurt. The question that had haunted her for days now hung in the air for all to answer. Would they choose comfortable lies or difficult truths? Long moments passed in silence heavy as pyramid stones. King Amanakaragram slowly sank back onto his throne, and for the first time in years, he looked not like a god-king, but like a man wrestling with his own mortality and mistakes. "Scribe," he said finally, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the hushed throne room, "you have shown courage that shames my own generals. You have spoken truth that cuts deeper than any enemy blade." The court waited, breath held, as their king struggled with forces beyond any military enemy, the battle between ego and integrity, between the desire for legacy and the demands of honesty. "I will not have you killed," the king declared, and a collective sigh of relief whispered through the throne room. "But neither can I allow you to remain in my court. You have chosen truth over loyalty to your king. Live with that choice, but live with it far from my sight." Nephra bowed low, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of a price she had known she might have to pay. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady, "I thank you for your mercy. I leave knowing that I have served not just my king, but my people and the generations yet to come who will read these words and know that truth lived in the kingdom of Kush." She gathered her scrolls, her precious inks, her worn reed pens, the tools of a trade she could practice anywhere, in service to anyone brave enough to want truth recorded rather than lies gilded. As palace guards escorted her toward the great doors, something remarkable happened. Instead of the jeers and hostility that usually followed criminals, whispers of respect rippled through the gathered crowd. "She chose truth over comfort," someone whispered. "She spoke for our fallen sons," another voice added. "The ancestors will smile upon her," an old woman declared. The great doors opened, and Nephra stepped into sunlight that seemed brighter than any she had ever known. Behind her lay the only life she had ever known. Before her stretched a future uncertain but unburdened by the weight of lies. Years passed like seasons along the Nile. Nephra found her calling not in royal courts, but in village squares and rural temples, teaching children to read and write, recording the true stories of common people whose lives mattered just as much as kings. Her reputation spread like ripples on water. The Truth Keeper, people called her. the scribe who would not lie. Parents brought their children from distant villages to learn not just writing, but integrity from the woman who had faced a king's fury rather than stain her conscience. The scroll she had read in the throne room was copied in secret and passed from hand to hand throughout the kingdom. People read not just the account of military defeat, but the story of moral victory, the tale of a young woman who chose truth over safety. Even King Amanakaragram, in his private moments, would read copies of her words. In time, he came to see that her truth-telling had served his kingdom better than any lie could have. The military lessons learned from honest assessment of the defeat had strengthened his armies. The people's respect had grown deeper when they saw their king could face hard truths. A new generation of scribes grew up taking an oath inspired by Nefra's example. I swear by the gods of truth and the memory of those who came before that my ink shall serve honesty, my words shall serve justice, and my scrolls shall serve future generations who deserve to inherit truth, not comfortable lies. Now, in the wisdom of her later years, Nefra would tell her students, power can command your hand, but conscience commands your legacy. I could have written the king's lies and lived comfortably in the palace. Instead, I wrote truth and found a different kind of comfort. The peace of knowing that my words will serve justice long after my hand can no longer hold a pen. But what of you, dear listeners? In your own life, when the voices of convenience whisper that small lies don't matter, when powerful people offer rewards for your silence, when speaking truth might cost you opportunities or comfort, what choice do you make? Are you content to write the comfortable lies that others demand? Or do you have the courage of Nefra to let your conscience guide your legacy, no matter the immediate cost? Remember what the wise scribes of Kush learned. Truth may be buried under sand, but the Nile will always uncover it. And so our tale reaches its end, but the question with which we began echoes still across the centuries. If you held the power to write history, would you honor the truth or protect your life by serving a king's lies? Nefra's choice reminds us that this dilemma isn't buried in ancient history. It lives in every generation, in every moment when we must choose between what is comfortable and what is right. Perhaps you're a student who must choose between honesty and easier grades. Maybe you're a worker who discovers something wrong in your company. Or you might be a friend who knows a truth that would be painful but necessary to share. What would you choose? Have you ever been in a situation where telling the truth cost you something significant? Share your story in the comments below. Your courage might inspire someone else to choose integrity when their own moment of testing comes. Next week, we journey to ancient Egypt on what happens when love defies tradition, when the heart chooses where the elders forbid. Another tale of love, another impossible choice between obeying her father or following her heart. Thank you for joining me in the Kingdom of Kush tonight. Remember, every time you choose difficult truth over comfortable lies, every time you let your conscience guide your actions instead of fear or convenience, you honor the courage of Nefra and all who came before us who paid the price for integrity. Your legacy is written not just in what you achieve, but in how you choose to achieve it. Until next time, may your own life be a scroll filled with truth that future generations will be proud to read. This is Ancestral Echoes by Horbathy. Keep listening to the wisdom that time cannot erase.